And when you hear the statistics about domestic violence, it's really an epidemic in our society. When you look at the fact that 1 out of 4 women employees will be subjected to domestic violence sometime in their work life, that's profound. You think about everybody in your workplace and all the women in the workplace, but also men are subjected to domestic violence as well. But it's a tremendous number of folks that are impacted by domestic violence, but also that impact your workplace, whether it be productivity, absences, medical care. The cost of medical care is tremendous. If you're self-insured, certainly that's an impact to you. So we're going to have Mary Kociela. Mary is the director of our domestic violence prevention programs. She's going to talk to you about the dynamics of abuse and also some of the work that we do in our office to not only prevent domestic violence, but also how we address it through the prosecutions. Our other speaker here today is Kate Van Court French from Community Crisis Response Team, and she was touched by domestic violence homicide involving Yoko Kato's daughter and grandson a number of years ago, and so she's going to talk about that impact that happened to her workplace and how it could impact your workplace if that ever happens. And we're really honored to have attorney Courtney Cahill. And Courtney is an expert in her field. She's a prosecutor from Bristol County District Attorney's Office. And she's the president of Employers Against Domestic Violence. And I want to make a pitch for her this morning and her organization. That organization is a very strong one in Eastern Massachusetts, and they're looking for employers that will want to be part of that network to get information and really be proactive about fighting domestic violence, and particularly focus on the workplace and how we can help employees. So our office of the Northwestern District Attorney, we have 76 employees, I mean actually up to 90 when I include our state troopers. We're a member of Employers Against Domestic Violence. So I want to encourage everybody here today to think about that for their organization.
Some of the things that, that occur in the workplace in terms of domestic violence, part of why we want you to know about dynamics of abuse is that the best way to be able to help a victim of domestic violence is if you understand the complexity of the issue. And unfortunately, it's not a simple issue. So you might have somebody who's getting text messages and phone calls at work, or maybe they're forced to quit their job. Or maybe the offender comes to work and harasses other employees at the workplace. Or maybe the offender contacts the person's supervisor and start to say disparaging things about the victim. These are just some of the ways that domestic violence finds its way into the workplace. And it's really no surprise when you consider how pervasive this problem is. And when you think about how often we are at our jobs in the workplace. So the fact that the two are going to meet is really makes a lot of sense. So that's why we're so glad that you're here, so that you can learn more about this. As the DA said, the problem is epidemic, really. And just to give you a sense locally, the Northwestern District covers Franklin and Hampshire County and the town of Athol. And just in that area alone, our local hotlines take 1,500 to 2,000 calls each year from survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And in the back of the room, Cassie Carter is our high-risk team coordinator. I did want to introduce Cassie and thank you for doing registrations this morning. We have what's called a high-risk team where we identify high-risk offenders. You know, these, and we'll talk a little bit more later about that, but these are the offenders that really, you know, the repeat highly lethal offenders. And I guess I'll say the caveat that I think any domestic violence case is potentially lethal, but these are the cases that we've identified that rise to that level. And right now we have 138 offenders just in the Northwestern District that we've identified as potentially highly lethal. Our district courts take, last year there were 1,300 domestic violence cases in our district courts. That doesn't count probate and family court, that doesn't count superior court, that doesn't count the child abuse cases that inherently have very often domestic violence involved. So it's something that we see all too often here. And finally, since 1984, there have been 21 domestic violence related homicides just in our district. 5 of those have occurred since 2010. There were 3 in 2010 and 2 in 2012. The 2 that occurred in 2012 were right here in Hampshire County, in East Hampton and in Huntington. And actually, a couple of days ago, I'm happy to say that Jeb Daly, who is the person accused of killing Jessica Dana in Huntington, pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. That just happened a couple of days ago. But in that hearing, the mother of Jessica Dana read a statement that the 10-year-old boy, 10-year-old son of Jessica had written, and he talked about how, as a 10-year-old boy, how angry he was to have lost his mom, to not have a mom to tuck him in at night, and to tell him that she loves him. So, you know, with Mother's Day coming up a couple days from now, it just breaks your heart, and you can see how this problem, not only is it epidemic and the statistics are high, it touches us all. You know, I'm willing to bet that everyone in this room either knows somebody that it's happened to, a neighbor, someone in your family, or possibly in your own family or to you. So that's why we're here. We have looked at this problem for years as sort of a family problem, something that's none of our business kind of thing. But finally, the tables are turning, and it's really being treated as the criminal act that it is. This is a violent crime that needs to be prosecuted as a violent crime, and it takes a community effort to combat it. It can't just be 1 or 2 people. So why is it that this is happening so often? So at the very core of domestic violence is power and control. What we're talking about is tactics of power and control, where one individual is looking to obtain and maintain that power and control over another individual. And I am going to just say quickly that a lot of the times while I'm talking, I'm going to be referring to the victim as she and the offender as he. And that's because so often that's what we see in terms of our statistics, and certainly in the domestic violence homicides that have occurred. But we certainly know that there are victims that are male, and we know that there's offenders that are female, but it's just a little bit easier to do it that way. When I talk about power and control, I'm talking about, you know, things as simple as saying to her what she should wear, or who she should talk to. We see a lot of this with teenagers in high schools, where, you know, you'll hear a teenage girl maybe say something like, well, you know, he only does that, or only tells me that because he loves me so much. You know, that disconnect between what love is and what is ownership and possessiveness and power and control over another individual. And then that can go all the way to, you know, threats to kill, threats to the offender threatening to kill themselves, or what we'll talk about a little bit later in terms of what's being called non-fatal strangulation, where the strangulation is used as a means of power and control, the ultimate means of power and control. We have victims who over time are strangled many, many times. The strangulation doesn't happen to kill the person, but to say, I can shut you up, I can kill you at any time. It's terrifying, and it also has many implications for the victim in terms of physical response and possible brain injury, and of course the fear in that situation. Domestic violence is not a crime of passion. How many times have you heard, you know, on TV, you hear about, you know, it's a crime of passion, it's, oh, he didn't mean to do it, it was a spontaneous kind of thing, it was, you know, he just lost control. I'm going to tell you right now violent offenders are very much in control. Violence is intentional. Offenders of domestic violence are in control of who they abuse, when they abuse, where they abuse a person. We don't see police officers going to the scene and being punched in the face. It's the victims that are being punched in the face. Typically, an employer might see the more charming side of somebody as opposed to the side that the victim sees. These guys are intentional in their violence. They know what they're doing. They know when they have the power and who they have power over. And to buy into anything less than that is to buy into the excuse for the behavior. And we don't want to do that. So what is domestic violence? I'm going to just try to define it for you just a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you a question, just put something out to you for a minute. I think when we think about domestic violence, typically you think about the physical abuse. That's sort of, that's the more obvious. And we see things, driving too fast on the highway. That might be something that you might not think of, but, driving dangerously to scare someone, not letting them out of the car, pushing someone down the stairs. Physical abuse increases when a victim is pregnant. And that's been shown. March of Dimes has done studies over and over to show this. And, a lot of times that's because the power and control, they can feel it slipping away. A lot of the attention's going to the baby and the person when the victim is pregnant. We also see pets being abused. That's why we're teaching veterinarians now about if they are, having pets come into their office and they're seeing abuse of the pet, they're being trained to think about, wow, I wonder if there's domestic violence in this home. We see that over and over. But domestic violence is bigger than just physical abuse. And it's important for you to know this because a lot of times it's the verbal and emotional abuse that actually can be more devastating for someone, or certainly as devastating. I've heard many victims say, you heal from the physical wounds, but it's those emotional scars that are so hard to heal from. So, we're talking about just the constant put-downs. You're fat, you're ugly, nobody would ever want you. The scare tactics, I'm going to take the kids, you'll never see them again. I'm going to go over and I'm going to kill your mother. Just the constant verbal and emotional threats that over time can wear somebody down and really have you feel like there's no way out. Social isolation is another type of abuse, and in the rural area that we live in, it's compounded. So if you live up in, Heath or Rowe or Cummington or Huntington, and, maybe your nearest neighbor is a mile down the road, and you're in a situation with an abuser who's not giving you the keys to the car and not letting you leave the home, and, pulls the phone out of the wall when there's an incident, your resources, it makes it really tricky. So social isolation from family and friends is another thing. Financial abuse. If you think about it, what's a way for somebody to get out of a situation like this? They need to have financial resources. If you don't have access to the finances in the home and you don't have the ability to know what the finances are and the ability that's going to hurt your chances of being able to get out. Abusers know this. And finally, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, rape, forcing someone to use pornography, just all kinds of, basically all different ways of tactics of power and control over a period of time that can really just wear somebody down and make it really scary to leave. So why is it? This is the question I want to ask you. Why do you think it's so difficult to get out? I mean, I think a lot of times, you hear someone say, gosh, if that were happening to me, I would just get the heck out of there. I wouldn't put up with that crap. But the reality is that, and I've heard this two ways, it's either 5 to 7 or 7 to 9, that a person will leave that many times before they're able to leave for good. So whether it's 5 to 7 or 7 to 9, this isn't simple. it takes a long time and a lot of tries to get out of that situation. So what do some of you think some of those reasons might be? Why would it be so hard?
I would think that shame would have something to do with it, and the ability to honestly say what's going on, because I think the bias is towards, well, I wouldn't put up with that, so
Right.
then it's compounded with you having to now explain to the person why you haven't left for you've only left or whatever the situation
Right,
is.
right.
So it's so then that leads to judgment, and people generally, the victims are going to feel further judged, which I mean, it's a complex thing.
yeah.
I would,
So yes, so the shame is huge, and you know, wouldn't it be lovely if we lived in a society where victims weren't blamed, and where if you were the victim of this type of violent crime, that you could just say, this is happening to me, and get all kinds of resources and not have to feel that shame. But absolutely,
I
that's...
mean, even if that's not occurring, because there are many good people who do understand.
Yep.
But just from me talking with people, you know, through work or other ways, there's always that hesitancy.
Even if you're getting the help, you still feel,
like, no,
that's
I
right.
understand, I get that.
Yep,
You know?
yep, for sure. What else? Can you think of other reasons why it might be hard? Yeah.
Financial.
Financial is huge. You want to say any more about that, or?
Just one feels that they can't make it on their own without two incomes.
Right, right.
Especially if there are children involved.
Yeah.
It's tough to find an apartment, the first month's rent, the last month's rent, the security deposit. It's not easy.
Yep, yep. And so financial is really huge. I mean, money really is freedom, and we know it's not easy for any of us to get, you know, an apartment and get situated. And then if you have children, that adds to it as well. So can you think of other reasons? Anything else? Yeah.
I think you kind of touched on it, that that victim really is a victim. They have an emotional attachment, and they've bought into what they're being told. No one else is going to want you. No one else is going to take care of you, and they've bought into that.
Yes, yeah. And you know, I have to say, victims of domestic violence are some of the most courageous, amazing people. That's the fact. But it's true that if you're in this kind of relationship and you're hearing that, you know, over and over, it does wear on you after a while, and you can start to believe it. You start to feel like you're doing something that's causing this, or feeling like it's your fault. Well, yeah.
People are told all the time, if you leave, I'll find you and I'll kill you. So it feels safer to stay and put up with the abuse than to leave and
That's right.
risk, which happens.
Yep. Thank you. You touched on my very next point, which is that not only does it take 9 to 11 or 5 to 7 times for somebody to get out of the situation, but when they do try to leave, statistically, that's the most dangerous time. So, you know, we say, well, why doesn't someone just leave? Well, the reality is that many people do leave, do try to leave, and we have a couple police officers in the room this morning, and I'm sure that they can attest to the fact that that's a lot of times when the ante is upped. And, you know, then the stalking begins. And with Facebook and, you know, social media these days, and texting, and, you know, there's GPS, and there's so many ways to up that ante and to track someone and to, you know, scare them into coming back or scare them into staying. So the thing is, I bring this up because I want to draw attention to the fact that this is what we do hear a lot. But when you ask the question, why doesn't she just leave? Really implicit in that question is blaming the victim. And we don't want you to do that. We want you to be asking not why doesn't she leave, but why is this happening? Why is the abuser abusing? What's going on here that society is allowing this to happen? And that way, we're not putting blame on the victim. So I want to just tell you a couple things, characteristics about abusers, and then I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. But this is the kind of guy that, you know, wants to get in the relationship really quick. We're talking about, you know, somebody who you just met, you're with them, maybe you go out on a couple of dates, and then right away they want to move in together. You know, I love you, you know, they love you right away, they want to move in together, they want to be with you every minute, they're texting you every minute. And, you know, it can appear that, you know, that's exciting, and of course we've all fallen, or many of us, you know, when you had that experience of falling in love, you know what that's like. You do want to be with the person all the time. But this crosses the line. This is like, you know, I possess you, I own you. But it doesn't always come across that way in the beginning, so sometimes it's hard to catch. There was a story recently of somebody who did try to get out of a situation, and then the abuser tracked them down and basically said, you know, get back where you belong. You know, and that might sound like a simple statement, but for a victim, that's a really scary statement. You know, get back where you belong. That's the mentality. You belong with me, I possess you, I say where you go and what you do. This is the kind of person who, if something were to happen in the workplace, let's say they, you know, were fired or disciplined, they're going to blame it on everybody else. This is somebody who externalizes all their problems. It's never their fault. It's everybody else's fault. They are extremely controlling and jealous. You know, again, we all feel jealousy at some time. I mean, that's a natural emotion. But for this person, the jealousy's over the top. So, you know, maybe he sees her in the parking lot talking to a colleague at the end of the day. She gets home and he, you know, beats her up because he says that she's having an affair with him. So, you know, just not wanting her to interact with anyone else, or if she does, assuming that this is, you know, that they're having an affair. The high-risk behaviors that I talked about before, in the high-risk team and all the teams, there's many teams across the state and across the country where behaviors have been identified. Research has shown that there are some behaviors that are more lethal than others. And so, as I said earlier, we have 138 people that have been identified as high-risk offenders. And some of those behaviors that we look at are threats to kill, having a weapon, especially a gun, the non-fatal, the strangulation that I talked about earlier, that's huge, hurting pets, children witnessing the violence. All of these factors are things that we look at. The other one is if the offender is suicidal, because many of the homicides that have occurred in our district have been homicide-suicide. And you notice if you read in the paper about domestics, it's often homicide-suicide. So now we know if somebody's suicidal, then it's really likely that they are potentially homicidal to their victim as well. So these are some of the flags that we look at, and you know, at some point, you don't need to look now, but there is in your folder, you have a high-risk brochure that outlines some of that and tells you how you could make a referral to the team if you needed to. The best way that you can help somebody is to know what the local resources are, get the best practice information from Courtney this morning, but also to have empathy for how complex the situation is. It's just not simple. If you're working with a victim, you're in it for the long haul. It's not going to be, oh, we know this is happening, she's saying it's happening, so now we're just going to take care of it. It takes a long time, it takes safety planning, and it can be really very complex. So it's just, that's a good thing to keep in mind, because it can be frustrating sometimes when you're the person trying to help somebody.